everybody. Welcome back to Your Full Crew. I am Dawn Zoldi, one of your co-hosts. And by the way, some of us are live from the fabulous city of Las Vegas, Nevada. We're here for the commercial UAV Expo this week, and we're going to be doing shows here all week long. We're riding hotel Wi-Fi, so bear with us, but I've got my co-host here with us as well.
Hi, and I'm Mike Peel, the other co-host of the Full Crew. We've got some great articles today. We're going to be talking about Starlink going down for 3 hours. We're going to be talking about AAM, future of vertical mobility. We're going to be talking about AI art and should it be able to win a competition? And we're also going to be talking about the industrial metaverse. And that term actually has a very, very unique meaning that I think everybody's going to be really interested in. Now we're going to go to our guests. Today we have Cameron Chell. Cameron, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Always so excited to get to work with you guys. So, and I will see you in the next day or so down in Vegas at the drone show.
Yeah, we're broadcasting live from ComUAV essentially, so we're going to be here all week. Then we also have Vidyut Jacob. So Vidyut, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm currently on the other side of the world. So I'm in India, but it's a pleasure to kind of be here with these guys. And yeah, so basically I work for a flying car company. So hopefully there's some cool stuff there.
Awesome. And just a reminder, if you like anything that you're seeing today, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the notification bell to subscribe to all notifications so you never miss a beat. We're going to start actually with Vidyut's article. So this is from the World Economic Forum. Do you want to dive into what this is about and why we should care?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just getting straight into the meat of it, it's an interesting one because I think over the years we've just seen I think the world deal with various different issues when it comes to living and you know, of course, a growth in our population and let's say urbanization has kind of led to some interesting challenges being thrown up, and this article was something that I found quite interesting because it coined a different terminology, and that being vertical urban mobility. You know, I think on a weekly basis now we get new terminologies in terms of what might transport you. And it's sort of hard to keep up, right? Even for someone in the industry. So I just wanted to kind of highlight some key points here and bring those to you guys and have everybody extrapolate on those. So it very much talks about the last mile and being able to kind of look at how the last mile has changed as our cities have sort of evolved. And that being, you know, in today's urban scape, we're primarily skyscrapers all over the place now. You know, you still have cities that expand, I think, on a horizontal axis, but that's an area that's probably in countries where the space is available to do so. But where it's limited, you have, I would say, a boundary in terms of how far you can probably go. And yes, sort of brings us to this point of the term itself, which is vertical urban mobility. I think there's a part of this article also that looks at not just the energy and the solutions itself, but also urban air mobility, which is something that I'm a part of, and I think it's a good way for me to also introduce the industry itself, and not just I would say leave it hanging at just a concept. I think you know, with regards to how we're building our cities, you know, and I think in corroboration to the article itself, you're looking at new formats of transportation to take you, let's say, up and down, not just on a you know, I would say on a vertical axis and as well as a horizontal axis, because people actually are living in so many different kinds of sort of situations. I'm not sure if my network's dropping out, guys, by the way.
Oh, no, your audio is clear.
You're good to go. Yeah, everything's great.
Oh, brilliant.
So,
Oh, that's
hey, Mike, if I could jump in, I'd love to, you know, just So I feel like some of the things they reference in this article are new. Some of them are really not. I mean, the concept of the 15-minute city strategy, I mean, folks have been doing that, I think, for a while, at least in the US. I know a friend of mine, I'm looking at Cameron's name, I think it was my girlfriend's neighborhood in Alexandria, Virginia was called Cameron Station, actually. And, we've seen these pop up, right, where there's all these townhouses, maybe they're 3 stories high with units at every level. And then, you've got your little grocery store there, your gym, everything within a 15-minute walk. That's the 15-minute city strategy concept. They have, little shuttles to take them to the Pentagon or wherever they work, different parts of the area of DC or Virginia. I think what's novel here are some of the ways that the infrastructure is becoming vertical, like things I didn't think about. I thought the Copenhagen, they have these bicycle bridges. Not a shock for Copenhagen. There's a lot of bike riding there. Very healthy people. All this stuff costs money. I think it's a great idea. It's so much healthier. A lot more community is fostered by these concepts. It's just a matter of, is there the will, to do it, I think. I'd love to hear, Cam's thoughts.
Well, what's interesting as you're talking about this is we've lived in Venice, California for the last, kind of 6-ish plus years. And one of the reasons we moved to Venice, believe it or not, was we could walk everywhere. Everything was right there. And so, but I needed to be close to a central airport for lots of reasons, mostly business and such. And so we made a family decision to cut down on my amount of travel and for us to live in like a center where we could just walk and do everything. And then during COVID, we actually moved to our summer cabin up in a little place called Bowen Island, Vancouver, British Columbia. And we haven't left for the last year and a half. It's just so amazing. But so we're on this tiny little island up here, and there's only like 3,000 or 3,500 people on it. But we spend more on gas, more time running around, going to appointments, all that type of stuff than we ever did when we lived in Los Angeles. So like a real live example of this 15-minute city thing where you don't have to use cars and all the rest of it. Really, like our life is so much less convenient. Now, there's lots of benefits to living on a little island, but it is very, very interesting, because I live in an area where it's very environmentally conscious, and when I really kind of put the numbers on paper, we lived a smaller carbon footprint as a family when we lived in Los Angeles than we do here. So I think there's a lot to be said for it, and I think there's a lot of discovery yet that's going to happen, certainly in this area.
It's interesting just even talking about how you can feel it, right? That you were able to walk to places and that kind of had a better impact on your life. There's a lot of like social reasons for that, or evolutionary social reasons for that too, right? There's been a lot. You've heard kind of rise online of people talking about kind of courtyard communities or court markets, walkable squares. There's an entire YouTube channel dedicated to basically just hating on roads and promoting bike structures in cities, and how this kind of changes the social landscape. So not only is it an energy efficiency thing, it's also how do people interact, and how does that affect community outcomes. So that I think that we're actually thinking about this now vertically. How do you maintain that? That's an interesting twist, right? Because if you're thinking vertical, you have to be thinking vertical because of scale and population density, right? You have to alleviate those concerns. But are those addressing the social communal concerns, or is it kind of it's not going to be able to?
I mean, in a weird way, it's sort of forcing you into a corner to kind of innovate and disrupt, which I think is interesting. I think it's always interesting looking at this in sections of the world, because in the West it's so different, and in India it's so different. I can't walk anywhere. Like, I don't get that option, right? From where I'm staying, if I need to go access something close by, it's still decently far away in most cases, and it's not precisely safe altogether. So, you're left with various different other concerns and elements that come in via the culture and the country itself. And it sort of makes it interesting in terms of, if I were to put forth the question in terms of what do you expect as a transportation solution that could be standardized across these different areas. Because that's also a key element to being able to um, be energy efficient, not just from the point of view of utilizing the transport, but even building the transport altogether. The more standardized it is, the better it is altogether, because you can probably reduce the amount involved in it. Um, I guess that was the point of the article. There are so many different questions and so many different um, verticals to get into, that we can never really stop talking about it. Um, I think specifically, just a key point on urban air mobility altogether. I think there is an aspect to say that our transportation system altogether, and whether it's public or private, doesn't really matter. It's not evolved as far as it could have evolved. And there is an argument that says that over the course of 100 years, where we're very much still either on four wheels, or we're still very much on the basic principles of aviation. Um, and it's nice, I think, in today's day and age to see that being um, innovated upon, and that's primarily because of the abilities we have today as a society, in terms of the technology available to be able to do these things. The change in propulsion, everything is go green, go electric, whether it's all the way from your smallest format of mobility to possibly your largest, right? Could be a Boeing or an Airbus or a large commercial airliner like that. And that also offers an interesting sort of approach in terms of really disrupting what we already have, rather than just create something completely new altogether. And I think the most critical point is how we design our infrastructures, I think. How our cities are built. They've been built, so in Europe, for example, they're just built over years and years of history. You can't really modify any of them. And this is something that I tend to, with my job, get into a lot, especially with where can you land aircraft in a city. There are things that I can't change, and there are places that I can't, and then there are places I can adapt. So just as soon as you can have, like, back to your point, Mike, about having these squares and courtyards, you can have them at different levels of a city, and you would essentially then be using space far more effectively than we do today, and facilitating interaction, or social interaction, or communal interaction at so many different levels. If I go back to the 60s and say you had the drive-in theater in the US, which you still may very much have in different places, as a culture thing, that can be brought about in so many newer and interesting ways, where you just have flying taxis sort of land on rooftops of buildings where they just sit and watch movies.
Oh my gosh,
And
that's
I
so
love
cool.
it.
And by the way, I have to say, Vidyut, you kind of glossed over. I know we were like, oh, make your bio short, but Vidyut works for Bellwether Industries, and they're making flying cars. So we were talking beforehand about how I met his colleagues at AUVSI Exponential, and I saw, the design image of that of your vehicle, and it is so cool. It just reminds me of Speed Racer, but like in the air. I'm like,
I
oh,
think
this is.
yeah, absolutely. I think that was like very purposefully done. I mean, we have to make the things look good because we want people to kind of take those on board. There's no point, in getting something that's not going to look good. I don't believe in that at all. But it has to work well, I think, more importantly. Um, yeah.
So I
Yeah.
was just gonna say, sign me up for your fly-in movie in the sky. I'm all in for that. Maybe that's a good time, Mike, to shift to the next piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could have talked about this for another hour or so,
I
so
know, easily.
maybe we'll have to have Vidget back for a deep dive on these concepts. Um, so yeah, next up we got Cam, kind of switching from physical to virtual. So I'm also going to send a link in the chat here, so you can grab that. We're talking about the metaverse, but this isn't just the Facebook metaverse. This is an industrial metaverse. So what's going on here at the University of Houston, Cam?
Yeah, well, what I find really interesting about this article and many others like it is the rapid adaptation of, you know, kind of maybe the consumer version of what we're hearing about, the populist version of what we're hearing about the metaverse, and but where the real practical applications are. And I think what's most important about that, at least in my mind, is that's the underpinning of something that's long-term sustainable. So it has use, it has utility. It's not novel. It's not you know, the next cool thing. It's just not a new type of interface. It is actually unbelievably practical, and in fact, I would even say essential. So when we see organizations like the University of Houston, and the list goes on, right? Whether it's you know, schools that are teaching in the metaverse, schools that are designing and building in the metaverse, schools that are teaching people to teach in the, you know, whatever the case is, the underlying premise here is that the metaverse is real and it's very, very practical. So we see, you know, engineering projects being done. We see simulations being done. We see this whole notion of us being able to interact in a 3D sphere. And I think what's important to note about this is that as we evolved as humans, you know, we have this, we have, you know, this spatial capacity. That's how all of our senses are built. And right now, the majority of our interactions in the world are on a 2D plane. By far, we are interacting more, you know, in this, you know, type of environment that we're experiencing right now than we are in a spatial environment, which is what we evolved to. And I think, you know, bringing that spatial environment into the computing realm, I think is really where things become very, very practical for us. Now, from a sociological standpoint, I think the metaverse has even bigger implications. But one of the reasons that it's going to have these big implications is because of the practical applications that we see being done within the industrial metaverse.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I want to just kind of backtrack for a second. This particular article, Cam, you mentioned this, but the University of Houston is launching this metaverse campaign with the AI Innovation Consortium, NVIDIA, and Technip FMC. And to your point, what they're doing is they are actually leading technology. They are working on industrial applications. So can you kind of explain, first of all, Cam, for those that are out there that might not really grasp, we've heard about this metaverse thing, right? But like, what exactly is it? And what is really unique about what Houston is doing with it, with their students?
Yeah, so I think no matter what definition of the metaverse I'll throw out there, it will be wrong, it'll be challenged, and everybody has a slightly different one. So I'm not trying to be right or precise here. So figuratively and conceptually, it's really a culmination of 3D environments that allow you to interact in you know, as yourself in any environment that you want to create. And generally, the whole thing is moving to live time 3D rendering so that you can interact in real time. So when you go into a video game or you go into Google Maps, you're going into an environment that's predetermined. And so that'll be early renderings of what we experience as the metaverse, but eventually everything will render in real time and be circumstantial based on what's happened in that moment. So just like you and I are interacting here, and we don't know what's going to happen in the next moment, when it does happen, it unfolds as it's happening. So it's really an entire new world, and that's where this whole sociological impact is going to be massive. So when you can start to apply that into the industrial world, where you can be designing drones or wind shears or weather systems or you know, any, you know, uncalculable amount of circumstances, you can actually do design testing that in time will be better than real world testing, because you can add in more variables to it. You can add in any potential or possible variable regardless of the statistic unlikelihood of it ever happening. And so that's you know, that's what I find really interesting about the not just playing in the metaverse or designing in the metaverse and working in the metaverse like Houston is doing, but where they're bringing the AI into it, because now you can bring in uncalculable, you know, amount of variables that actually makes it more real. And so again, like the implications on the industrial design side are far-reaching. In fact, I think it will be one of the key reasons that the entire human race will be able to technologically evolve and be able to do things like space travel and such, because it can handle and deal with things that we actually can't quite comprehend yet.
My mind is blown. I don't know. What about you, Vidyut? What do you think about this?
I was going to jump in anyways. I think that's a great point you make, Cam, because being a designer myself, this is something that is about I think in my head on a daily basis, anyways, and trying to kind of fiddle with what's new out there. I think obviously I'm familiar with the metaverse in terms of how it's being applied by so many different companies, not just Nvidia being more I think on the tech front, and then you've got Nike, for example, using it to kind of change consumerism or traditional formats of consumerism. As a designer, I would love to kind of just have it there as a tool to kind of see what I would give people to experience who've never experienced flight from a point of view sort of position, right? Because I'm talking all about taking people from the car, putting them into something that's flying, and then sending them up 3,000 feet in the air. But they don't know what they're going to experience. They don't know how they're going to feel. If it's going to land on their balcony, how they I can actually simulate that, and I can show that to them. And I can kind of get them almost trained or psychologically trained to deal with that huge change. Is one very key sort of way I would love to use it. I think apart from that, definitely being able to kind of build worlds and universes and environments where you could possibly just have. I think the key word or defining word to probably something like the metaverse is limitless at this moment, because it's very hard to kind of close it off and say, oh, this is where the application ends. I think we can find a use for it everywhere, and I think anything can be used alongside that. It is a mixture of AR, VR, and ultimately your real world in itself, and it does force you to kind of utilize even your physical space, right? When you're using AR and VR, you're using it a bit differently when you're kind of in an augmented format. Whether it's putting on an Oculus or whether it's playing a game on a PlayStation or a Wii, you're using those things a bit differently in and around to how you would anyways. It's already changing behavior in some way or the other. I'm just pretty excited to see what it does, because I think as Cam rightly pointed out, it is going to be everywhere. It is going to be used everywhere. And I'm just curious to see how it would be used. As a designer, it's just the most exciting thing ever. Just changing the status quo and like disrupting everybody's daily life in a really good way, I think.
I hope it is. I'd love to hear Mike's thoughts, because I have a couple, but I want to hear what Mike has to say.
Well, I have lots of thoughts about the metaverse, but let's attack the specific metaverse that Cam brought up, because as he said, there's multiple definitions of this out there. That's kind of the thing I don't like about the term, because there's the crypto scarcity side, which would play into a fully three-dimensional space that we could all share together, where then things we trade amongst each other, or maybe plans for something, have a unique value, and that's very important for those digital worlds to truly twin our normal world, right? Our real world. But on the actual side of the evolution of kind of 3D software, 3D tools, working with 3D environments, and actually making them usable, we're finally getting to that point. And Cam brought up AI, but I'm going to also bring up procedural generation. So one of the issues with trying to model a 3D world is the amount of data it would take. So procedural generation is kind of like, let's think about cells growing, right? They all have their little instructions, and with those few little instructions, they create a whole body, right? That's how you can actually create grass or trees in a digital world for a very, very small amount of memory, like a 4 kilobyte package. And then, add AI on that, that's shaving the edges off of what was this very, very hard process of building these worlds, right? So you combine that with 3D scanning technology, like we saw in our last episode, where basically this firm Skirion is scanning all the World Heritage sites in the Ukraine, with the ability to now model these worlds with realistic lighting, with ultimate efficiency that we wouldn't even have on computers 5 times the size 2 years ago, because we have these formulas now. I think we're kind of at the advent of finally figuring out how to make 3D space tie in with real space, because that separation has a cost. It has a cost on even our experience of it being almost tiring. Like, oh, this doesn't feel exactly like my hands. But when it starts to get closer, then it becomes inseparable. And also, if you try to do 3D modeling now, the tools you're using, a mouse or a knob or whatever, really kind of feel removed, and it becomes a completely intellectual process rather than a tactile process. So all these evolutions, I think, are fantastic, and seeing the investment in not only colleges but from industry into kind of understanding like where we're driving towards now, I feel like we're kind of shedding some of the stupidity of early VR kind of marketing talk and getting into real on the grounds, like this is how this technology is going to actually influence the world.
Well, I'm going to have to try on, there's a company that's going to be showing here at CUAV, Key AI, and they have the AR goggles. I'm going to put them on because here's my concern, honestly. I know this sounds really, maybe it's going to sound silly to you, but I always think about accessibility. And I know for myself, even when I've gone to Disney World and they slap those goggles on me, or I do one of those rides, I get sick. Like, there's something with like the motion and like, so I'm like, can everybody really get involved in this metaverse? Is that even possible? I don't know, because, and so that, and then of course the digital divide, are there going to be the haves and the have-nots even in this world? There usually are. And how do we cross that, or how do we prevent that, right? As we're designing, how do we include accessibility into our designs for this world? I think that's going to be so important. Otherwise it's going to be maybe not optimal. But just from a personal level, I just don't even know if I could do it, just because you slap those goggles on me. I don't know what it does to my brain, but it does something with my middle ear, and I don't know. I just
there's something to that, because it's only tricking the cones and not the rods on your eye. So like your rods, they're like the black and white, so they're more sensitive to depth. So they're not fooled by the thing that's right here. They know the distance, but the color receptors are like, hey, there's depth here, and they're very influential. So that's where the nausea comes from, though, for a lot of people. But that can be fixed by refresh rate, resolution. That's a matter of time. So that's a scaling issue, like Moore's law. We got some comments from Chris Wedgeworth, our super fan, so I'm gonna read them all off real quick. Happy Labor Day. Go Speedy, in reference to the Speed Racer design, so congrats, Vidyut. Wow, Mike is very smart. Thank you. And some people do get motion
sick. He is.
Sick.
I always knew it. Yeah.
So, any final comments to kind of wrap this up, Cam? Because we're coming up on the midpoint.
Yeah, no, I think a great conversation, and thanks for letting us bring it up. And as it relates to having to have the hardware on or not, like, part of this iteration will be even in this 2D world. I do think that everything will evolve to 3D spatial websites, and every website will be a Web 3.0 type of experience. And I just think that that's going to allow us to interact with each other in a way that that spatially we're more comfortable with. I know it's changed, so it feels uncomfortable, but when you can immerse it will be a richer experience, and even in the 2D plane we'll be seeing more of that. But anyway, great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing it up. So I just want to take a quick break to thank our sponsors. We've got a new one, Promo Drone. We're going to actually have Jamar Williams on the Full Tilt tomorrow, so we're really excited about that. We've got Elsight, our favorite Israeli firm for connectivity. We've got Vodex, which handles drone orchestration. And then we also have Draganfly. So thank you, Cam, for your continued support of this podcast and everything Dawn and I do. So we've got Dawn's article up, and we're going to kind of riff off the AI from the last one. And I think this actually ties in more than Dawn would have expected when she selected the article. So what's going on here, Dawn?
Yeah, a couple things jumped out at me when I saw this. Of course, many of you know I live in Colorado, and this was about an art contest that occurred in Colorado. The artist is a guy named Jason Allen. He's actually a game designer that lives in Pueblo, West Colorado. He won first place in this emerging artist division, and it was for digital arts, digitally manipulated. I think that's a key word, photography category at the Colorado State Fair Fine Arts Competition. His winning image was called Théâtre d'Opéra Spatial, Space Opera Theater, and it was made with Midjourney. It's an AI system that can produce detailed images when fed written prompts. Well, here's the rub, everybody. The judges didn't know that he used AI pretty much almost exclusively to create this. Now, what he said was, I think he had like 900 iterations, and he had to manipulate those, and then he also used what's that kind of finishing software. He used another software, I forget
Photoshop?
the name, I apologize. Yeah, he used Photoshop to finish it, things like this. But I'll tell you, and it was only a $300 prize, right? So the stakes weren't high here. But just from a philosophical standpoint, for many people, and especially many artists, it was a big deal. And you had folks just jumping out on Twitter. I love this quote, so I'm just going to say it. Some Twitter user wrote, quote, "This sucks. For the exact same reason we don't let robots participate in the Olympics." And, it does. It raises so many interesting questions because, the human, kind of machine AI interface, where's the line drawn? And it really does, Mike, as you said, it ties into a previous Full Crew episode where an inventor had submitted in the United States a couple of patents that his AI created the design completely, and he listed the AI as the inventor. And the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office said no. There needs to be a human inventor under the law. And the court agreed under the terms of the statute, under the language of the statute, it had to be human. So, think about that in terms of art, because so much art, it gets copyrighted, it's intellectual property. I just see a lot of connections between that last article and this, but also the kind of societal implications to this. What does art really mean? And who gets to create it? And how much robot is okay to still be called truly art? So I know this is all mind-blowing because we're talking about metaverses and we're talking about flying cars, and now we're talking about, AI just creating beautiful works of art with a little bit of human assistance.
Can I go first on this one, Dawn? I got a lot on this. So as somebody who started as a designer and had to learn all this tech stuff, the idea that it's no longer art because somebody used a tool is like saying that every piece of art has to be completely alla prima from the person's mind. Like, oh, I painted this perfect human body. What about, just the methods that they used in the Renaissance, like setting up wires to make sure they had the thirds? Is that no longer art now? What about the camera that I'm using now? You could take beautiful landscape photography of it, and is that not art? And one of the most hated kind of moments in art school, because I went for one semester, was when this photographer took somebody else's photo and then put a different frame around it, and the teacher wanted us to talk about the philosophical implications of it. And my whole thing at the time, and I still stand by it, is, well, she sold it, so somebody thought it was art. And yes, applying a new frame to something is an iterative process. You've created new context for the piece, and legally and emotionally, it's art unless you want to be angry about it because it was too easy, right? So that's kind of the issue here. And the truth is, there's an assumption of easiness. So Actually, our thumbnail is going to be used with Wamba Dream. We're going to use some AI art to actually create the thumbnail for this episode, just to kind of make the point at how easy it is to get started. But to get to the image that this person actually created, having used these tools, it requires an understanding of how that tool works. His prompt was probably over 500 words, which means he tested how it looked each time, and then he still had to refine it. So the person is still definitely in the loop here, and if a computer generated 10,000 images all by its own with no input, I don't think we would call that art because there's no narrative, especially in the West. Actually, I'll limit that to just the West because there's different contexts for art globally. But in the West, we tend to think of art as narrative. Like, what's the story, right? People buy the story behind a piece. I think about Banksy's piece that he tried to ruin through the shredder as it was sold. The minute it was sold, and then the shredder broke. That just sold for, I think, 4, maybe 5 times its original auction costs. Why? Because it's got one of the best stories in art history. So you want to buy a piece of that story. So that's my take on this. It's still art. It's an exciting new evolution. It's a nice new tool.
So,
I think
Vidyut, go ahead.
I paint a lot and I like it and I draw and we've got artists in our lineage. My grandmother paints, my mother paints, and it's like never ending. I mean, like there's Klimt right there at the back
Oh,
as well.
cool.
So I mean, like I love art, and I love all the eras and the evolution. So I do agree with Mike here. This is an evolution. I think there is a bit to this in terms of the fact that if somebody using Midjourney won an art contest, I don't necessarily think like if it's a Midjourney only art contest, I get it. But if it's not, then I don't because it's still a situation where I would still argue, maybe from my point of view, where it's not necessarily the most skill based or technique based or years of practice based sort of result that you've achieved. There was a respect at some point for that in the traditional scope of art or any format of art where it was practiced and then perf perfected and then the result was sort of given over.
Yeah, but
I think in
okay. Sorry,
yeah,
I don't want to cut you off.
sorry. So just with regards to this, in I think it's a medium, it's a tool, but I think the biggest problem and why it's becoming a moot point is the fact that I would assume it's 70% or 80% plus of the job is being done by the tool and not necessarily. So it's like 20% on the person running the program. So I use Photoshop, and then sometimes there are things that Photoshop to do. And I know lots of people using Midjourney right now, and you can create some really amazing looking stuff. It's a creation. I don't necessarily think that. I think it's still a creation or an exploration. I don't think it'll ever sit at the level of a Klimt or an impressionistic era masterpiece, right? Because
Yeah.
that's years of somebody either going through a crazy life and then telling a crazy story with each piece of work. So
Yeah, that's
so
kind
yeah,
of my point. There's a story to Klimt. You're buying the human's journey, right? Everything that took them to get to that point is what makes it interesting to us
yeah.
as people. Otherwise, it's just wallpaper, right? We don't consider wallpaper art for that reason. And yeah, I kind of agree. But I could actually mark the moment in Western art history where skill no longer becomes part of the conversation, and that's the Impressionists. So that's when concept enters the frame. Um,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
absolutely.
So
I think I agree with that completely. And I think I can also mark eras where certain different things and facets became part of art altogether, right? There was pres like an engineering level of precision to something like the Bauhaus. There was
yeah,
there was a mixture of an engineering level of precision and a very decorative feel with something like Nouveau. So you've had these really interesting sort of facets come in, and I think this is very much the beginning of what Midjourney and other sort of it really links very well, I would say, all the articles so far. I think I can find so many different bridges to cross now. It's quite weird.
yeah.
I would
Well,
probably
I
I
know
was
just
it's
talking with a friend about like we're using these for 2D right now, but at some point I'm gonna have this in my Houdini console when I make, you know, images, and it's like, oh, it's not looking right. Type make it look more like a frog, and then I start sculpting from there, right? So
Yeah.
you're gonna see a massive evolution in complexity of art, because basically you're getting the entire knowledge of every other artist who's ever worked also at your fingertips, and I think that's the massive change with this.
And that's a
I have
great segue
one-
over to Cam because he's like our AI guy. So, Cam, what are your thoughts on
No,
this?
I am so happy being on a which happens often for me on a podcast where I'm like the least smartest person, and this is you know, both you guys got this nailed, and
So
I wish
humble,
I would
Kim. Honestly.
I know, I'm like thinking, I just found an article. I have no idea.
Oh man, it's I agree with you guys. I would love to disagree for the sake of a good podcast, but the reality is I think it's art, and you know, for like somebody, you know, looked at it and said that is the best piece of art here. Full stop, end of story. And there is a story behind it. And I do agree that the skill to come up with a piece of art that could compete on an IA basis with, you know, people that are using other tools like a paintbrush or such, or that there is real skill there. Like any one of us can go in and put in a bunch of words into an AI engine and come up with something. And it's generally, it's obviously not art. It's like novel at best. So I think it's, and I do think it will segment into, you know, AI art, you know, just like there's watercolor or oil or ceramic or whatever the case is, and then AI will have 1,000 different, you know, kind of subsections underneath that, and the market itself will determine, you know, where it places value, when it places value, what are the cultural contexts around it at that time. There'll be different times when certain AI will be worth more than an oil painting by a master, or vice versa, or whatever the case is. But I think it's amazing. It's an expression of story. It's an expression of the human psyche and the human interest, the human tale, everything about it. And at 100%, in my opinion, we should be embracing it rather than, you know, any time in history we've seen something to say, oh, that's not right, and we've got to repress it. You know, how many years or generations later where it's like, man, those people were stupid thinking that, you know, like,
Well,
you know.
I like where both of you are going because, you know, I guess, you know, being a lawyer and a little bit of a stickler that words matter, digitally manipulated was the division, and was it digitally created? Like, is there a difference? Like, is there a difference? And if there was an AI category and it was completely transparent, you know, for this judge to be like, oh, I didn't really know at all that he used that, you know, what it was, but I thought it was just really cool. Well, that's great, right? But like to Mike's point earlier of what if, you know, I don't have access to those tools and I'm competing against this. I do think the Twitter person, as crass as they were, has a point. If there's a robot races in the Olympics, great. We're all going to cheer them on. That's really cool. Let's do it. I would love to see that, honestly. But if it's robots competing against humans and you don't even know they're robots, I've got a problem with that. And I guess I'm making this really simple here. But I think just a little bit more transparency, and absolutely, I'm not disagreeing. It's art. I think in this case, it would have been great. Almost like when you buy, you know, food now, all the ingredients are listed. Let's talk about what went into this thing, you know, before I'm competing against someone that didn't have, you know, that capability of those tools or whatever. So.
All right, yeah, Vidyut.
I'm just saying I'd call it accessible art. You know, if anybody can do it, I think it's the fact that people who may not want to pick up a paintbrush, or may not want to kind of sit there for hours on a canvas, have the ability to kind of use tools that they're maybe more familiar with. I can think of Generation Z being huge. You know, like this becoming the norm for them. But I can also see the flip side to this that makes real paintings a lot more expensive, which is going to be a bit.
Yeah, there's usually an ironic twist like that, right? Yeah, it's very true. So, Don, I'm just going to disagree, and because I could punch to the next article, I get the final word.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a nice feature of being in control of the switchboard. But, I mean, under the context of digital manipulation, I think this person actually follows to the letter what the requirements of that contest were. Where if it wasn't that, if it was just a pure photo contest or surreal photo contest, then yeah, that was a little crappy. But that title made it an easy win, I think, for this person to utilize this tool, because it's no different than pushing pixels on Photoshop just with one of their like filters, for example.
Yeah.
In fact, they have neural filters now, so you couldn't even separate that software out. So we got a question from Jason Chris. Meta and AI have so many uses. How will the scaled versions affect power consumption and electrical bids based on data needs and storage?
Oh, wow. Yeah,
That's-
the things we don't think about, like, yeah, let's do this big metaverse thing and have alternate worlds, but where's the electricity for that coming from? Great. That's, by the way, Jason Chris is CEO of Class G. They're creating toll roads in the sky. And Jason was our sponsor of the month for the Dawn of Drones podcast for Innovation Month in July. So great question, Jason. I don't know if anybody wants to tackle that infrastructure question.
I mean, it's a there's so many different. I mean, like I think how will just denotes the fact that there's definitely a possibility of it becoming. I think right now, initially in its initial stage, yes, they would consume a certain amount, but as we progress, I think it would reduce as our abilities sort of increase, and that the turnover now maybe is every 2 years or every year or every half a year we're better and better and better and better, and I think you're just going to get to a point where all of these things are still going to be far more. I think. Available. I don't know how to term this, but it's going to be accessible on various different formats, which means that the power consumption would actually be lower. So maybe I can just ultimately enter the metaverse with my phone, and I don't really need an Oculus and a system doing it. And so it really depends on how it's tweaked and used. I mean, like maybe I can just use Midjourney on again my phone. That's become the largest point of accessibility now. Your laptops in so many ways are becoming redundant just by way of your gadgets becoming smaller and their consumption probably becoming smaller. And I think software is also, I just want to highlight, I mean, for example, Apple Silicon, the chips
M1,
that they
M2s.
use. Yeah, M1, M2. I'm using the laptop now, and there's a market difference in performance and also consumption. And the same softwares that would consume so much more power now consume nothing, almost next to nothing. And I'm getting a lot more bang for my buck, so to speak. So this is evolving, and it's hard to say when. I mean, in today's day and age, if there's anybody who provides a timeline and tells me when this is going to be available, I cannot believe it at all. I just don't.
Yeah, I'll add another layer of complexity to that is efficiency in the software and how it uses the power consumption. So AI assisting tools,
Yeah,
are helping programmers actually not write overly verbose code. At least core level programmers, your top level wizard engineers, like they're always going to come up with the magic tricks. But there's a lot more just base level programmers than there used to be, and they write a lot of crap code that's very inefficient. So these kind of AI assist tools, like what is it, GitHub Copilot or something? Forget the exact name or branding, but that's going to lead to better computational efficiency. If you want to check out a great podcast on that, Lex Friedman with John Carmack. John Carmack built Doom, and he worked on the Oculus at Facebook. I think he's still there. He's also launched rocket ships, so he's quite the engineer if you want some background on this stuff. Right, yeah, what do I do? And he can improve a Ferrari from the factory settings, so I clearly am not at his level. All right, final article. This one's a little bit less controversial, but I think it's just something that we actually don't talk about enough. Outages on the internet. In this case, Starlink suffers its first big breakdown with 3 hours of global blackout on its service. I think Starlink as a brand power is pretty robust. I think we kind of just expect it to work, especially with the price and the subscription model. But it's like any other internet connectivity device, and especially one that, 300 satellites circling the globe.
3,000, Mike.
3,000. Okay, so yeah. and they're all running the same software apparently. And the estimation here is that the lights went out from an update. There's also, I think, something that we're just going to be seeing more of in all of these kind of global tech articles is concerns about Russia and China attacking these things, because geopolitics are not what they were 5 years ago, at the very least. Which kind of saddens me a little bit because it's getting into Kremlinology. We don't know why this service went down, but PC Mag, of all of the pedestrian computer magazines or publications online, used to be a magazine, is okay, kind of even hinting at that. So that I also think was a big change, and it's actually a reasonable concern if we're being honest. So who wants to go first on
I was
thoughts?
going to say, Mike, yeah, I can make this controversial for you. So
okay, go for it.
Yeah, so look, they bring this up because Musk warned that the Russian government has actually threatened, been trying to jam and hack Starlink. Why are they doing that? Because Musk gave Starlink to the Ukrainians.
Mm-hmm.
So, we talked about this before, this idea of dual use technology. Once you kind of hand that over in such a public way to be used in support of a war effort, right, for combat forces, you've now put your system at risk. And General Paz isn't here right now, but I feel like he would agree with me. You may have very well made that a legitimate military target.
I would agree with that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So just because everybody in California, New York, Texas, the UK, and New Zealand are using it, also, you've put that at risk by giving it to the Ukrainians in such a public way and saying, hey, use this for free to fight back against the Russians. And so I don't think it is a far reach to say that this was hacked or attacked by the Russians.
Yeah, but there's an absence of evidence of that, so we don't know yet. But like what I'm kind of just bringing up is that now we live in a world where you actually do have to consider that as one of the possibilities.
You absolutely have to consider, and I would love to hear Cam's thoughts on this, because I know you've been very supportive of the Ukrainian war effort, and I think the risks sometimes, right, to commercial ventures that do that. I don't know that that's always transparent. I think this could be one example. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, super interesting. And so I'm on this island up in Canada right now, so I'm using Starlink, and it's a good service. We actually happen to at some expense able to have a cable system in here as well, so I've got dual systems, and the Starlink works pretty well, and such. So anyway, I'm a fan of it, and then when we're over in the Ukraine, of course, like literally we're that is the main communication system now for our drone operations and such. So I do agree 100% that he's opened it up as a target, right? And selfishly, I think about that because we're over there doing operations now. We're doing mine detection and humanitarian relief and a bunch of different things. But does that not open up us to being a target? And certainly, I know on our own cyber world within Draganfly, we consciously really tighten things up, in case of those types of things, just because we've chosen to take a position on it. But I don't think taking a position, or standing up for what you think is right is necessarily a wrong thing. But the consequences of it is that it may affect your shareholders or your consumers or all the rest of it. It's a very new product. I mean, Starlink's incredibly new, and so even if it wasn't a cyber attack or something geopolitical, I don't it's amazing that it's up there and it's operating as well as it does so quickly, and it's scaling at the pace that it's scaling. Really, a 3-hour outage?
Yeah.
It's kind of like nobody's going to care about this in 3 weeks from now. Like nobody's going to give a rip unless it, obviously it keeps happening. But I think that organization will iterate pretty quick and try to make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen again. But it's going to happen because they're pushing the envelope, right? They're going to do things that and build expectations that we want met. And in turn, we want software upgrades, we want faster this, more of that, and they're going to hit snags. So I'm not sure exactly why it happened, but I don't think it's going to make it. If anything, it'll make them better and push the first service even further.
Well, isn't 99% uptime still 3 hours a year?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Or no, 3 days.
And the reality
is,
it's ridiculous. We think it's ridiculous that it's not 99.555, 999 type thing.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point they'll have to get there because there'll be more critical services on it. But
yeah. Vidyut, any ideas
Yeah, I
about?
was just thinking about it. I think I only have one point, which is probably to do with the announcement of providing Starlink itself. And what that brings up is it's a bigger debate. It's just in my mind, it's more relative to the entire social media aspect of things and saying something and then it's suddenly spreading, right? Like wildfire, combating that, and then suddenly everyone knows. And I think with tech, it just talks about responsible technology or being responsible with technology or any format of technology all over. So in lieu of a war taking place, right, in the world, and there's tech that can be used in that war in any manner. If of course that there have been countless examples of tech being given silently in support, and I think that's probably a much better way to do it than to turn around and because tech can be your best friend and then suddenly it can be your worst enemy. It has that degree of polarization and power in it to kind of do those things, and there have been countless examples of it. I've not had the chance to use Starlink, so I wouldn't know much about the offering and how good it is, but I do believe in some of the amazingly disruptive and innovative sort of ideas that come out of there and that side. And I think it's good that we have someone who's doing that because it's very needed. So from that point of view, I think it's great. I do also agree with the fact that no one's really going to care too much beyond the point on the 3 hour outage. It's similar to it's an interesting parallel I'm drawing. I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but it's an interesting parallel I'm drawing to the autopilot on Tesla, right? Like when that sort of became available, you had hackers going after it and wanting to kind of hack it and use it, and you're going to have many more instances of those things happening. Similarly, as has happened with this Starlink thing, you're going to have multiple tries on satellites floating around the Earth, and phones. It's like a constant. I just don't think it should be announced ever. Like I'm providing this to X, Y, and Z in support of or to use of. That's not the purpose. The purpose you're actually providing it is actually to support, not to show that you're providing support. I think that's the distinction.
Well, I think Don would argue, and add some clarity to this. It's in some cases you can't actually. Oh, we got a baby. In some cases you actually can't, right? You can't support without announcement, right,
Yeah.
Don?
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't think I have a concern with him announcing it, that he was doing it. I think the ramifications of that sometimes aren't thought through.
Right.
The fact that you've now, in the law of war, become a dual use technology that has also become a military target. Like, I don't know. Cam obviously has thought that through, and I love what Draganfly is doing on the humanitarian basis in Ukraine, helping to save lives. I agree with you also, on the other hand, Vidyut, that people that have, with very good intentions, provided, for example, drones, that folks are using them to drop grenades from them and kill people that perhaps they didn't really think about when they, thought they were going to be used for mapping, as an example. So,
Sure.
like you said, it could be, technology's technology, and humans, when they get involved, they're going to do things with it, things that maybe you didn't anticipate. But really great. We got to close it up. I mean, again, I meant to make this controversial. I did. So that's
Thanks, Don.
So mission accomplished here. But we are at the top of the hour, and I can't believe we are. So just to close it out again, if you haven't subscribed to fullcrew.io, please do. Press the like button and the subscribe bell. and you'll the notification bell, and you will get notifications of when we're live again. We will be live tomorrow, by the way, everybody, with Jamar Williams from Promo Drone. Jamar is an amazing human being, and he's going to be talking about leading with your truth. So check that out if you want to know what that's all about. 9 a.m. Mountain, 8 a.m. Pacific, which is the time zone we're all now in. And Wednesday, Tony Drummond on the Dawn of Drones, Prestige Air Group, and Global Aero Management Group. By the way, everybody, if you're out there, you're listening, and you're in Vegas today, please join us for our networking happy hour event, Flash Mob, at Gilly's Saloon, 7 p.m. Pacific time today. That's at Treasure Island. That should be a ton of fun. And then this Thursday, we have on Clubhouse, special time, 2:30 Eastern, Workhorse Group. If you haven't heard of them, you might not have. I'm telling you, it's crazy. They're making autonomous trucks and launching drones off of them for last mile delivery. So absolutely check out Workhorse Group in Clubhouse. We're going to have Rob Heber with us, and then he'll be on the Dawn of Drones following week. So lots of stuff going on in the crew and on Dawn of Drones. Thanks for being with us, everybody. Thanks for your comments, Chris Wedgeworth and Jason Chris. And thank you, Cam and Vidyut, for joining us today. Can't wait to see you, Cam, in person.
All right, we're out here.